Okay, so here are our notes for 19.1b. I'm going to walk you through this. This is very similar to 19.1a. The main difference comes with down here when we change our amplitude a little bit. Just like yesterday, the period of our graph, the way we find it, if our equation is in this form of y equals a sine b theta or y equals a cosine b theta. If we're doing radians, we find the period by doing 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. Or if we are in degrees, we would do 360 divided by the absolute value of b. The way we find the amplitude is by using a. Now, we have the graphs of the original functions. These are the ones that you did on your project. And what we want to discuss is what do you do if there is a negative in front of your amplitude sign? And if you in front of your amplitude number, I'm sorry. So if you look at this graph, this is the graph of y equals negative sine theta, and this is the graph of y equals positive sine theta. So instead of starting at the middle and going up to the top, it starts at the middle and goes to the bottom. Now it will still continue the process. Now if you were using this yesterday when I said middle, top, middle, bottom, middle as the pattern, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle, and that makes one full period. When your amplitude is negative, the tops become bottoms and the bottoms become tops. So this would be middle, bottom, middle, top, middle to make an entire period. Same thing with the cosine. If it was top, middle, bottom, middle, top, and then we make our amplitude negative, the tops become bottoms, the bottoms become tops. So it would be bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. So if we were to graph one of those, looking at this one right here, -2 is the number in front. Now, my amplitude has to be positive because my equation has it in the absolute value. So the amplitude is not -2, it's +2. However, because it's negative, I'm not going to be using the original sign of the middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. I'm going to be using middle, bottom, middle, top, middle. Now, I don't want to memorize this one because I just want to memorize the two that I had that were easy. So all I have to remember is flip your B's and your T's. T's become B's, B's become T's, and you don't have to worry about memorizing two new patterns there. So my amplitude is 2, so I'm going to go ahead and mark 2 and -2 on here. And I'm finding this in degrees, so 360 degrees divided by the absolute value of b, which is 3. 360 divided by 3 is 120, so that tells me how I'm going to be setting up my x-axis. My period is 120 degrees. So if I mark this one, 120, half of 120 would be 60, that gets me my middle marker, and then half of 60 would be 30. Now, once I find that first one, that's the one that actually tells me what they're counting by. So that'll help me find the third one. So I'm going 30, 60, next one would be 90, and then 120. So those are my markings right there. So now I start in the middle. Instead of going to the top, I'm going to the bottom, middle, top, middle. So I'm going to draw in my curve. And what this negative has done, as she states up here, it is reflected vertically across the x-axis. So instead of reaching the maximum point first, it reaches the minimum point first. So the curve looks pretty much the same, except that it is completely flipped from what it originally was. If we wanted to talk about domain and range, our domain here is all real numbers. It's always all real numbers for these types of graphs. And our range, we're bouncing back and forth between -2 and 2, so I would say -2 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to +2. All right, trying the next one. Again, we have a flip. Because this is negative, I'm not going to be using my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle one. I'm going to be using this guy. So bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. We're going to be doing this one in radians. My amplitude is going to be 1. Again, amplitude has to be positive. To find the period, I'm going to do 2 pi divided by my b value. Now, when I have theta over 3, that means my b value is 1/3, because that really means 1/3 theta. Now, 2 divided by 1/3 is 6 pi. So let's see, I have 6 pi, I have 3 pi, would be halfway. Halfway between 1 and 3 would be 3 pi over 2. And halfway between 3 and 6, or if I wanted to think about it as counting by 3 halves, this is 3 halves, 6 halves, 9 halves, so 9 pi over 2, and then 6 pi. That would be 12 halves. So there's my values there. My amplitude is 1. Just to get a little bit of extra space, I'm going to go ahead and mark this line as 1 so that I have a little bit more room to see what's going on. And I'm going to start at the bottom this time. Bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. And again, curve those ends around. Don't let them continue going down because we know that they're going to curve back up as they continue on with the next period. So, our domain, all real numbers. Our range is, we're bouncing back and forth between -1. So -1 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to +1. So, let's turn the page. You take a minute, why don't you pause the video and take a minute and do these two, and I'll go ahead and do those and then show you my results. Okay, so here I have this first one done. This one does not have a negative amplitude, so we can just use our regular top, middle, bottom, middle, top for cosine. Our amplitude is 3.5. And then to find the period, I do 360, because we're doing degrees, divided by b, which is 4, and that gives me a period of 90 degrees. So I wrote 90 degrees right here. Half of 90 makes this one 45, and half of 45 makes this one 22.5 degrees. Now again, I didn't do it, but you guys could label your x-axis down here just so that it doesn't get so messy up here, because it kind of gets hard to read. So once I have this beginning number, 22.5, that tells me what they're counting by. So 22.5, and then if I take 22.5 and add another 22.5, that's where the 45 is. If I add another 22.5, that gives me 67.5 for this one right here, and adding another 22.5 gives me 90. Another way I can find this third one is I can add together 45 plus 90 and divide by 2. That gives me the number right between them, exactly in the middle. Since my amplitude is 3.5, I just went ahead and counted by ones here. Now you'll notice I didn't go to a grid line, I went halfway between 3 and 4 for the 3.5. So this one ended up being top, middle, bottom, middle, top for cosine. Make sure to curve those ends around because it does not go up beyond there, it continues down. Domain is always all real numbers. And then my range, I went ahead and wrote it in decimal form because since they gave me a decimal, it's okay for me to write my answers in decimal. So we're bouncing back and forth between -3.5 and +3.5, which is where my range comes from. Okay. All right, so you can pause the video and try the next one. Okay, so I have this one done here. This one has a negative amplitude and it's a sine. So here's the original sign, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And I changed my tops to bottoms and my bottoms to tops. So that's the pattern I followed once I got it down. 3.5 is our amplitude. Again, it has to be positive. And then, since we're doing radians, 2 pi divided by 1/4 gives me a period of 8 pi. So I labeled my x-axis. This would be 8 pi. Half of that is 4 pi. Fill in my 2 pi and my 6 pi. I should fill in my y values there. Again, I labeled up to 3, but I went a half a unit further than that so that I went from -3.5 to +3.5. So here's my middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, and again extending a little bit to put my arrows. Domain is still all real numbers, and my range goes from -3.5 to +3.5. Okay. All right, my last two questions here. Write the equations of the following graphs. So looking at this graph right here, if I look first off at the at the y-axis, we look like we are in the middle on our midline, right? In the middle. Our amplitude goes up and down from this location. So since we have starting at the middle, we have a sine graph. So I know that we have sine first of all. From there, it looks like my amplitude, if they're counting by ones here, looks like the amplitude is 1/2. Because each line is representing 1/2. Now, because I'm going middle bottom instead of middle top, it's going to look like negative 1/2 up here. I have to make it negative to represent that it has been flipped upside down. Now, a period. Again, middle, bottom, middle, top, middle. That denotes the end of one period. Now, it looks like 120, 240, 360. I'm not quite sure what that measurement is. So, let's see. Is that the halfway? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It is halfway to 360. It's also halfway between 120 and 240. So that marking is 180 degrees. So the period for this is 180 degrees. Now, how do I find what that does here? Well, we're in degrees, so 360 divided by B gives me that period value of 180 degrees. So how do I solve for B? Multiply by B. That gives me 360 equals 180 B. Divide by 180. And 360 divided by 180 is 2. So if my B value is 2, I have sine of 2 theta. And that would be my equation. Now I still do need to fill out domain and range. So down here again, domain is still all real numbers. My range, we're bouncing back and forth between negative 1/2 and positive 1/2. So I'm going to write negative 1/2 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to positive 1/2. And that's my graph. And the last one, starting again at the y-axis. I'm at the bottom, which means that I have a negative in front of my amplitude. And it also means that I have a cosine graph because I'm starting at the bottom instead of the middle. So, if we're talking about amplitude and period. So, my amplitude, my midline looks like it's still the x-axis. I think we're kind of sticking with that for right now. And we're counting by ones. So we're going up 3 and we're going down 3, which means my amplitude is 3. So in my equation, that's going to be a negative 3 because it is reflected over the x-axis. That also tells me my range is going to be negative 3 to 3. My domain is still all real numbers. Now let's talk about the period. Bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom. That would be the end of one full period. If you notice, that says 8 pi. So 8 pi is the length of one period. So I'll fill that in for my period right there. And now I got to figure out what B is. So we're dealing in radians, so I would say 2 pi divided by B, and when I get that, the result was the period of 8 pi. So I'm going to multiply by B to get rid of the fraction over here. So 2 pi equals 8 pi times B. And to get B by itself, I would divide by 8 pi. And 2 pi divided by 8 pi, the pi's cancel, and 2 over 8 would reduce to 1/4. Why did I write equals twice? So B equals 1/4. So how do I write 1/4 theta? I would write theta over 4. So that's the end of your notes. Your homework is worksheet 19.1b. So make sure you get that done, and that is due tomorrow.